My name is Dee Richards, 68 years old and retired from teaching fourth graders for over 3 decades in Boston. I never imagined my golden years would include housing my son Thomas and his wife Jessica in my basement apartment for what was supposed to be 3 months but has stretched into 18. I love my boy fiercely. Always have, but Jessica has been pushing boundaries since day one. Last night, I prepared Thomas's favorite pot roast to celebrate his promotion, spending hours in the kitchen, making everything perfect. Then Jessica looked me dead in the eyes across my dining table and said those words that finally broke my patience. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and tap that subscribe button if you want more stories about standing your ground with difficult family members. I became a widow 7 years ago when my husband Jack passed from a heart attack. It was sudden, devastating, but I found strength in my teaching career and my relationship with our only son, Thomas. We always had a special bond, the kind where we could talk for hours or sit in comfortable silence. He was there for me after Jack died, coming over every Sunday for dinner, helping me navigate widowhood with patience and love. Thomas met Jessica at the accounting firm where he works. He was 33, dedicated to his career, and hadn't dated much since his college girlfriend. Jessica was 29, beautiful, with a charm that could light up a room when she wanted. Thomas called me the day after their first date, sounding like a teenager again, excited and nervous. I was thrilled for him. Their romance moved quickly. Within 6 months, Thomas brought Jessica to Sunday dinner and announced they were engaged. I was surprised by the speed but tried to be supportive. Jessica seemed sweet that night, complimenting my home, asking about family recipes, showing interest in Thomas's childhood photos. Still, there was something in the way she examined my furniture, making subtle comments about how she would have chosen different pieces that gave me pause. The wedding was small, just 40 guests at a local restaurant. Jessica's parents paid for everything. Her mother, Laura, a tall, perfectly coiffed woman with diamond earrings, worth more than my car, spent most of the reception telling anyone who would listen about their family's summer home in Newport and their trips to Europe. Her husband, Robert, a quiet man who seemed perpetually uncomfortable, nodded along with everything Laura said. After the honeymoon, things seemed good. Thomas was happy, and Jessica was pleasant during their visits, though these became less frequent. Then, about 6 months into the marriage, Jessica lost her job at an interior design firm. She claimed her boss was jealous of her talent, but something about the story never quite added up. With just Thomas's income, they struggled to afford their apartment. One Sunday dinner, Thomas hesitantly asked if they could stay in my basement apartment for a few months while they saved for a new place. The apartment was nothing fancy, just a bedroom, bathroom, small living area, and kitchenette. I had renovated when Jack was sick, thinking he might need a first-floor space. I rarely used it except for the occasional visit from my sister. We agreed on 3 months. They would pay $500 monthly for utilities and food, a fraction of market rent in our area. I thought it was generous but fair. They needed help, not a free ride. Thomas was grateful, hugging me tightly. Jessica smiled and thanked me, but I caught something in her expression. A calculation, perhaps, that made me uneasy. They moved in the following weekend. Jessica brought more boxes than my basement could reasonably hold. She asked if they could use my garage for storage, then my spare bedroom, then a corner of my attic. Before I knew it, their possessions had infiltrated every spare inch of my house. The first month was adjustment. Jessica worked from home doing freelance design work, or so she said. I rarely saw evidence of actual clients. Thomas left early, came home late, working overtime to build their savings. I tried to give them space, spending more time at my book club or visiting friends. By month 2, Jessica had started rearranging my furniture when I was out. Nothing dramatic at first, just moving a lamp or repositioning a chair. When I mentioned it, she said she was just trying to improve the feng shui. Thomas asked me to be patient with her artistic sensibilities. 4 months in, with no mention of moving out, Jessica replaced the curtains in my living room without asking. They were expensive silk things that didn't match anything else in the house. When I expressed surprise, she seemed offended, saying, "I thought you would appreciate an upgrade. My mother says good curtains make the home." That was the first mention of Laura, but not the last. Every suggestion, criticism, or change Jessica made came with a comparison to her mother. Laura's cooking, Laura's decorating, Laura's gardening, Laura's entertaining skills all were apparently superior to mine in every way. Thomas began to change, too. My once considerate son started avoiding eye contact when I asked about their timeline for moving out. He would mumble about the housing market or unexpected expenses. Jessica would interject about how Laura and Robert supported them emotionally without putting pressure on them. At the 6-month mark, I gently reminded them of our original agreement. Jessica burst into tears, claiming I was making her anxiety worse. Thomas put his arm around her, giving me a disappointed look, as if I had been unnecessarily cruel. And so 3 months became 6, then 12, then 18. My house no longer felt like my own. Jessica's touches were everywhere, from scented candles I was allergic to abstract artwork that gave me headaches. Thomas spent more time at work than at home, and when he was home, he deferred to Jessica on everything. Throughout these months, Jessica's mother Laura would visit, critiquing my housekeeping and cooking with backhanded compliments. "How brave of you to use such bold colors in such a small space," or "It's refreshing to see someone cook without worrying about calories." Jessica would beam with pride during these visits, as if Laura's approval was the highest currency. I began to understand that in Jessica's eyes, I would never measure up to Laura. The woman had set a standard of maternal perfection that was both impossible and, from what I could see, built on wealth rather than love. But for the sake of keeping peace and having Thomas in my life, I bit my tongue and endured. The job search that Jessica claimed to be conducting seemed perpetually stalled. Each week brought a new excuse. The job market was terrible. Her industry was too competitive. Potential employers couldn't recognize her unique talents. Or most commonly, her anxiety was too overwhelming to face interviews. Thomas never questioned these excuses. He would come home exhausted from working 10-hour days, only to comfort Jessica about another job prospect that hadn't panned out. I watched my son growing thinner, more stressed, while Jessica spent her days watching reality television on my couch or scrolling endlessly on her phone. One evening, after Thomas had gone to bed early with a migraine, I tried to have a heart-to-heart with Jessica. We sat at my kitchen table over tea, and I gently asked about her career plans. "I just feel so much pressure," she said, stirring her tea without looking at me. "Laura says I should only accept a position that reflects my worth. But surely some income would help while you look for the perfect job," I suggested. "Thomas is working so hard." Her face hardened instantly. Laura would never suggest I devalue myself with menial work. She understands that mental health comes first. Thomas understands that too. When I pressed further about their timeline for moving out, Jessica teared up. "I cannot believe you would bring this up when I am so vulnerable. Laura would never make me feel unwelcome." The next morning, Thomas confronted me before work. "Mom, Jessica was up all night crying. Why would you stress her out about moving when you know she has anxiety?" "Thomas, it has been 9 months. We agreed on 3. I love having you here, but Jessica needs to contribute something." His face fell. "I thought you were helping us because you wanted to, not because you expected something in return." That comment stung deeply. My own son, who had watched me work 2 jobs to put him through college, was implying I was selfish for expecting adult responsibility from him and his wife. The pattern continued. Any attempt to discuss timelines or responsibilities was met with tears from Jessica and disappointment from Thomas. I began to feel like an unwelcome guest in my own home, walking on eggshells to avoid upsetting the delicate balance. One Tuesday afternoon, I returned from grocery shopping to find Jessica wearing my pearl necklace, a 30th anniversary gift from Jack. She was taking selfies in my bedroom mirror. "That has tremendous sentimental value," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I would appreciate you asking before borrowing my things, especially jewelry from Jack." Jessica unclasped the necklace with a dramatic sigh. "Laura lets me borrow her jewelry all the time. She says sharing beautiful things brings joy." She dropped the pearls into my palm without apology. The borrowing didn't stop there. My scarves, my books, even my special occasion shoes disappeared into Jessica's possession, often returning damaged or not at all. When I mentioned a missing cashmere wrap, Thomas suggested I had probably misplaced it myself, implying my memory was failing. The financial strain of housing two additional adults began to show. My grocery bills tripled, my utility costs soared, and the $500 barely made a dent. I dipped into my retirement savings, something I had promised myself I would never do. Then came the day I discovered Jessica's shopping habits. A delivery arrived while she was out getting a manicure, something she did weekly despite claiming financial hardship. The package was addressed to her but mistakenly left at my door. I brought it inside, noticing the high-end department store logo. Later, Thomas called from work, asking if I could find an important document in their apartment for him. While searching his desk drawer, I found credit card statements showing thousands in debt, mostly from Jessica's clothing and beauty purchases. There were also receipts for restaurants on days Jessica had claimed to be too anxious to leave the house. I said nothing about my discovery, but it changed something in me. The sympathy I had felt for their situation began to harden into resentment. I loved my son, but I was enabling behavior that would ruin his financial future. The final straw in this phase of our living arrangement came when I returned from a weekend visiting my sister in New Hampshire. I walked into my living room to find it completely transformed. My comfortable old sofa had been replaced with a modern sectional I had never seen before. My reading chair was gone, and the walls had been painted a stark white, covering the warm yellow I had chosen with Jack years ago. Jessica greeted me with a wide smile. Surprise, I thought it was time this place had an update. Laura helped me choose everything. What do you think? I stood speechless, looking at a room I no longer recognized. Thomas appeared behind Jessica, clearly nervous. Mom, we wanted to thank you for letting us stay. Jessica thought refreshing the space would make it nicer for everyone. You painted my walls without asking, I finally managed to say. You removed furniture that I loved. The old stuff was so dated, Jessica said dismissively. Laura says this open concept look adds at least $20,000 in property value. This is not about property value. This is my home, my memories. Thomas stepped forward, always the peacemaker. Mom, Jessica was just trying to help. She spent all weekend on this. Can you at least try to appreciate the effort? Once again, I was cast as the villain for having boundaries. I retreated to my bedroom, the one space still untouched by Jessica's renovations, and cried for the first time since Jack's funeral. I mourned not just my changed living room, but the son who could no longer see his mother as a person with feelings and rights. That night I made a decision. I would not ask them to leave, not yet, but I would no longer be a doormat in my own home. The next morning, I informed them that the $500 rent would be strictly enforced every month with an agreement in writing. Jessica looked shocked, then angry, but with Thomas standing there, she had little choice but to agree. It was a small boundary, but an important one. Little did I know it would become the spark that eventually ignited our final confrontation. As months 13 and 14 of their stay passed, Jessica began systematically excluding me from family matters. It started subtly with small decisions made without my input but grew more blatant over time. Thomas's 35th birthday approached, an event I had always made special. Since he was a child, I baked his favorite chocolate raspberry cake and planned the day around his interests. That year, I mentioned birthday preparations to Jessica 2 weeks in advance. Oh, she said, not looking up from her phone. I have already planned everything. Laura is helping me organize a surprise party at that new gastropub downtown. I see, I said, trying to hide my hurt. Will I be included in this surprise? Jessica glanced up with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. Of course. I will text you the details once everything is finalized. The text came the night before the party, informing me it would start at 8 in the evening, a time she knew I rarely stayed out due to my early rising habit. The gastropub was loud, crowded, and filled with people I had never met, mostly Jessica's friends, and a few of Thomas's work colleagues. Laura presided over the event like a queen, introducing me to others as Thomas's mother, while referring to herself as Thomas's other mother. Thomas seemed happy but distracted, checking on Jessica, constantly making sure her drink was full and that she was enjoying herself. He barely had time to open my gift, a first edition of his favorite childhood book that had taken months to find. He thanked me quickly before Jessica pulled him away to meet someone else. The exclusion continued when Jessica invited Laura for extended stays, without discussing it with me. I would come downstairs to find Laura at my kitchen table drinking my special occasion tea from my best china. "Good morning," Laura would say, with her characteristic condescension. "Jessica mentioned you usually sleep in. I hope we did not disturb you." 7:30 in the morning was hardly sleeping in for a retired person, but in Laura's world, anyone not up at dawn was lazy. These visits lasted days, sometimes a week, with Laura claiming the guest room I had previously used for my sister's visits. During these stays, Laura and Jessica would speak in rapid French when I entered a room, often dissolving into laughter after I left. My 2 years of high school French were not enough to follow their conversations, but the tone made the intent clear. I was the outsider, the joke in my own home. Thomas grew more distant during these visits, too. He would arrive home from work and be immediately enveloped in Laura and Jessica's private jokes and plans. If I tried to talk to him alone, one of them would interrupt with some urgent matter requiring his attention. One evening, while looking for a misplaced insurance document in my home office, I accidentally opened a folder containing Thomas and Jessica's tax returns. I should have closed it immediately, but a figure caught my eye. Jessica had reported income from a trust fund the previous year, substantial income that she had never mentioned. Further examination revealed that this trust had been paying her monthly for years, including throughout their entire stay with me. The next document was even more revealing. A bank statement showing regular transfers from Laura and Robert to Jessica's personal account, separate from the joint account she shared with Thomas. These amounts added up to more than what many people earned in a year. My hands shaking, I continued looking, and found correspondence between Jessica and her parents' lawyer regarding property investments they were making on her behalf. The most recent document, dated just 2 weeks earlier, discussed the purchase of a condominium in a luxury building downtown, fully paid for by her parents, as an investment she could either occupy or rent out. They had money. Significant money. The financial struggle they had presented as their reason for moving in with me was a lie. I confronted Thomas the next day when Jessica was at her weekly spa appointment, another expense that contradicted their claimed financial hardship. "Thomas, I found something by accident that concerns me." I began showing him the documents. His face went pale. "Mom, you had no right to look through our personal papers." "It was an accident, but that is beside the point. You and Jessica have been lying to me about your finances. She has a trust fund. Her parents are buying her property. Why are you living here paying token rent when you could afford your own place?" Thomas collapsed into a chair, looking suddenly exhausted. "It is complicated, Mom. Jessica does have family money, but it comes with strings. Laura controls everything. If Jessica does not live the way Laura approves, the money gets restricted. And what does Laura want that requires you to live with me instead of in the condo her parents bought?" Thomas could not meet my eyes. "Laura thinks Jessica married beneath her. She wants to prove that my income alone cannot provide Jessica with the lifestyle she deserves. The plan was for us to struggle visibly for a while before Laura swoops in with financial rescue." I felt physically ill. "So, I am part of some twisted power game. Do you know how this makes me feel?" Thomas used. "Disrespected in my own home." "Please, Mom," Thomas begged, taking my hands. "Jessica is sensitive about money. If she knows I told you or that you know about the trust fund, it will cause a huge problem between us. Our marriage is already strained." Against my better judgment, I agreed to keep what I had learned to myself. I loved my son, and despite everything, I wanted his marriage to succeed if that would make him happy. But something fundamental had changed. The betrayal cut too deep for things to continue as they were. The next day, I drafted a formal rental agreement specifying the $500 monthly payment and basic house rules about shared spaces and guest policies. I presented it to both of them that evening. "What is this?" Jessica asked, barely glancing at the document. "Since your stay has become extended indefinitely, I think having clear expectations in writing will benefit everyone," I explained calmly. "We are family," she protested. "Families do not need contracts." "Even families need boundaries," I replied, "especially when original agreements keep changing." Jessica signed with obvious reluctance, making a show of her displeasure. Thomas signed without comment, avoiding my eyes. From that day forward, Jessica became even more passive-aggressive, leaving dishes in the sink for days, playing music loudly when I was trying to sleep, and forgetting to pay the rent until I reminded her multiple times. The tension in the house grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Thomas spent more time at work, clearly avoiding the conflict at home. I began making plans to visit my sister for an extended stay, thinking distance might improve the situation. But before I could finalize those plans, everything came to a head at a dinner I had lovingly prepared to celebrate my son's accomplishments. I spent all day preparing Thomas's promotion dinner. He had finally made senior accountant after years of dedication, and despite the tension in our household, I wanted to celebrate his achievement properly. I made his favorite meal from childhood pot roast, with root vegetables, homemade rolls, and chocolate raspberry cake for dessert. I used my best china crystal glasses that had been wedding gifts from my own mother and linen napkins I had embroidered years ago. The table looked beautiful, a warm invitation to family celebration. I even bought a bottle of expensive champagne, something I rarely indulged in. This night was about Thomas, about acknowledging his hard work and success. Thomas arrived home from work, looking tired but pleased. He kissed my cheek and thanked me for going to such trouble. Jessica came downstairs 30 minutes late, already frowning. "Something smells burned," were her first words as she entered the dining room. "Nothing is burned," I assured her. "Everything is just right. Please sit down." Thomas pulled out her chair, ever the gentleman his father and I had raised him to be. "Mom went all out for us, Jess. Look at this spread." Jessica glanced at the table with barely concealed disdain. Laura would have catered from that new French restaurant. Their pot roast is much more tender. I bit my tongue and served the food, determined not to let her spoil the evening. We managed a few minutes of pleasant conversation about Thomas's promotion before Jessica started picking at her food. "This gravy has lumps," she announced, pushing her plate away slightly. "And the meat is overcooked." "I am sorry it is not to your liking," I said evenly. "There is salad if you prefer." "Laura makes her own vinaigrette with imported olive oil," Jessica replied. "I doubt the salad would be any better." Thomas looked uncomfortable, but said nothing, continuing to eat his dinner with forced enthusiasm. I changed the subject, asking about his first projects in his new position. As he began describing them, Jessica pulled out her phone and started scrolling occasionally, showing him photos that interrupted his story. "Look at these curtains Laura just had installed," or "See the new landscaping at their house." I tried to redirect the conversation back to Thomas several times, but Jessica seemed determined to center attention on herself and her parents. Just as Thomas was telling me about a big client he would be handling, Jessica's phone rang loudly. "It is Mom," she announced, answering immediately and putting the call on speakerphone without asking if it was appropriate during dinner. "Hello, darling." Laura's voice filled the dining room. "Are you having a pleasant evening?" "We are at dinner," Jessica replied with a theatrical sigh. "Dee made pot roast." "Oh," Laura's voice dripped with sympathy. "Is it edible? Remember that disastrous pot roast at the country club fundraiser? The chef was fired immediately." Jessica laughed as if this was the height of wit. "This one is about the same quality. Tough meat, lumpy gravy." I sat there stunned that they would criticize my cooking so openly while I was right there at the table. Thomas fidgeted with his napkin, saying nothing to defend me. "Well, when you visit next weekend, I will have Giovanni prepare his specialty roast for you," Laura continued. "A properly cooked meal will be a nice change." They continued this conversation for several minutes, with Jessica describing my carefully prepared meal in increasingly unflattering terms. I sat silently watching my son's face as he failed to interrupt or end the inappropriate call. Finally, Laura said she had to go. They had opera tickets. Just before hanging up, she added, "Give Thomas our congratulations on his little promotion. Perhaps now he can finally afford to take you on a proper vacation." The dismissive way she referred to my son's significant achievement, something he had worked years for, lit a fire in my chest. But still, I maintained my composure. Jessica ended the call and turned to me with a smirk. See how Laura appreciates fine dining, she would never serve lumpy gravy. I took a slow breath. The dinner tonight was prepared with love for my son. I would appreciate if you could respect that. Love, Jessica rolled her eyes. If you really loved Thomas, you would want better for him than this mediocre food in this dated house. You are not even half the woman my mother is. The dining room fell silent. Thomas stared at his plate, his face red with either embarrassment or anger, I could not tell which. Jessica sat with a satisfied expression, clearly believing she had put me in my place. I pushed my chair back slowly and stood up, placing my napkin beside my plate with deliberate care. Looking directly at Jessica, I replied in a calm, clear voice. Then she can start paying your rent. Thomas's head snapped up, his fork clattering against his plate. Rent. What rent? Jessica's smug expression dissolved instantly. Thomas, I can explain. You have been paying rent to my mother since when? With what money? Thomas's questions came rapid fire, his confusion evident. $500 monthly for the past 5 months, I said, still standing. Part of a formal rental agreement Jessica signed. We do not have extra money for rent, Thomas said, turning to Jessica. We are barely covering our bills and saving for our own place. Where is this money coming from? Jessica's face flushed red. My personal account. The one my parents deposit into every month. You have a separate account I do not know about. With enough extra to pay rent that you never mentioned to me. Thomas's voice rose with each question. Do not act so innocent, Jessica snapped. You know my parents help us sometimes. Help us. You told me we were declining their offers so we could make it on our own. You said that was why we were living here, to prove we did not need their money. I slowly sank back into my chair, watching as months of deception unraveled before my eyes. Jessica's careful facade cracked as Thomas pressed her with more questions. Where was the money really going? Why had she hidden financial arrangements from him? Why was she paying rent in secret? Because your mother threatened to throw us out if I did not, Jessica finally shouted, pointing at me accusingly. She said we had overstayed our welcome and needed to contribute or leave. That is not true, I interjected calmly. I asked for a reasonable contribution toward household expenses after more than a year of supporting you both. I never threatened eviction. She is lying, Jessica insisted, tears starting to fall. Thomas, you know how she has always resented me, how jealous she is of my relationship with my own mother. Thomas looked between us, clearly torn and confused. The dinner sat forgotten on the table, growing cold as the argument heated up. I cannot believe you have been lying to me, Thomas said quietly. About money, about arrangements with my mother, about everything. I have not been lying, Jessica insisted. I have been protecting you from the pressure your mother puts on me when you are not around. I remained silent, letting Thomas reach his own conclusions. Jessica's words grew more desperate and contradictory as she tried to explain away her deceptions. Finally, unable to maintain her story, she pushed back her own chair, with such force it toppled over. Fine. If you are going to take her side over your wife's, then I am leaving. Call me when you remember where your loyalty should be. She stormed out of the dining room, footsteps pounding up the stairs. Thomas sat frozen for a moment, then stood with a weary sigh. I should go after her, he said, not meeting my eyes. Do what you need to do, I replied softly. But Thomas, I hope at some point we can have an honest conversation about what has been happening in this house. He nodded once, then followed Jessica upstairs. Minutes later, I heard the front door slam and a car engine start. They had both left, abandoning the celebration dinner I had spent all day preparing. I sat alone at my beautifully set table, surrounded by the remnants of a meal nobody had finished, struck by the symbolism of it all. Like this dinner, my relationship with my son had been carefully cultivated, lovingly maintained, only to be left cold and unappreciated because of Jessica's manipulations. For the first time in months, the house was completely quiet. I should have felt relieved by their absence, but instead a profound sadness settled over me. My son was caught in a web of deceit. and I feared what it would do to him when he finally saw the whole picture. I began clearing the table, wrapping food, and washing dishes, mechanical actions that gave my hands something to do while my mind processed the evening's revelations. As I put away the last of the leftovers, I wondered if this confrontation was the beginning of the end, or perhaps more hopefully, the end of the beginning of a more honest relationship with my son. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my reading chair by the bedroom window, watching the street below for Thomas's return. The hours ticked by with no sign of his car. Around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a text message. "Staying at a hotel tonight. Need time to think. We'll talk tomorrow." At least he had let me know he was safe. That small consideration gave me hope that whatever happened next, my son still cared enough to ease my worry. Dawn came, and with it a strange sense of calm. For months I had been living with tension and resentment, walking on eggshells in my own home. Now everything was out in the open, for better or worse. I made coffee and toast sitting at my kitchen table in the quiet house. Around 9, I heard a key in the front door. Thomas entered alone, looking like he had aged years overnight. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes red-rimmed from either lack of sleep or crying, possibly both. "Mom," he said, simply standing in the kitchen doorway. "There is coffee," I offered. "Are you hungry?" He shook his head, but came to sit across from me, accepting a cup of coffee with a murmured thanks. We sat in silence for a few moments, neither quite ready to start the difficult conversation. "Where is Jessica?" I finally asked. "At her parents' house in Cambridge. Laura drove down last night to pick her up after she called them." Thomas stared into his coffee cup. "She would not come back with me to talk things out. Said she needed her mother's support." Of course, Laura had swooped in at the first opportunity to separate Thomas from his wife. "I am sorry, Thomas. That must be difficult for you." He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "You are apologizing to me. After how Jessica spoke to you, after all the lies." "I am sorry you are hurting," I clarified, "not for standing my ground." Thomas nodded slowly. "I had no idea she was paying you rent, or that she had a separate account, or that her parents were still giving her money. She told me we were doing this on our own, that staying with you was temporary while we saved." "How much have you actually saved in 18 months?" I asked gently. He laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "Almost nothing. Every time I think we are getting ahead, there are unexpected expenses. Jessica's car needed repairs, or she had to help a friend in trouble, or there was a once-in-a-lifetime sale she could not miss. And you never questioned these expenses." I trusted her. His voice broke slightly. "I thought we were partners." My heart ached for him. Thomas had always been trusting, seeing the best in people. It was one of his most endearing qualities, but also what made him vulnerable to someone like Jessica. "Last night at the hotel, I checked our accounts," he continued. "There have been withdrawals I cannot account for, transfers to an account I did not know existed. Thousands of dollars, Mom. Money we supposedly did not have." "Jessica has been making purchases," I said carefully. "Designer clothes, spa treatments, lunches out." Thomas looked up sharply. "You knew?" I suspected. I saw the packages arriving, the shopping bags, but it was not my place to question how another adult spent money, until I found the tax documents. I told him everything then about accidentally discovering the trust fund information, the property investments, the regular deposits from Laura and Robert. With each revelation, Thomas's expression grew more pained. "She has a trust fund worth over $2 million, he whispered. "And she let me work 60-hour weeks while complaining we could not afford our own apartment. She let me believe we needed your charity." I think Jessica's relationship with money is complicated by her relationship with her mother. I suggested, trying to offer some perspective. "Laura seems to use financial support as a way to control Jessica." Thomas nodded grimly. "Laura has never approved of me. She wanted Jessica to marry the son of one of their country club friends, someone with family money and connections. When Jessica chose me instead, Laura told her she was making a mistake she would regret. And yet Laura still gives her money." With conditions. So many conditions. Thomas ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Jessica has to check in daily, follow Laura's advice on everything from clothes to career choices, spend holidays with them instead of you. The money comes with golden handcuffs. A clearer picture was forming in my mind. And Jessica hoped to eventually control you the way Laura controls her. Thomas looked startled by this insight, then slowly nodded. Maybe. She is always pushing me to earn more work, harder aim for positions that would impress her parents. Nothing I achieve seems good enough. Like making senior accountant at 35, I said softly. Yeah. Laura called it my little promotion, like I had won a participation trophy at elementary school field day. The hurt in his voice was palpable. Thomas, I need to ask you something difficult. Are you happy in this marriage? Not just yesterday or today, but generally. He stared out the window for a long moment before answering. No. Not for a while now. I keep thinking if I can just work harder, do better, be more of what she wants, things will improve. But the goalposts keep moving. We talked for hours that morning, really talked for the first time in years. Thomas admitted the strain in their marriage had been building long before the dinner confrontation. Jessica's criticisms, her secretiveness, her constant comparisons to Laura had worn him down. He had been walking on eggshells too, afraid that any misstep would trigger her disapproval or tears. I feel like I have lost myself, he confessed. The person I was before Jessica, the things I enjoyed, the friendships I had all gone because they did not fit her vision of our life. As painful as the conversation was, it felt like a breakthrough. My son was finally seeing the unhealthy patterns in his relationship, not just with Jessica, but with me as well. He apologized for allowing Jessica to disrespect me in my own home, for not standing up for me, for taking advantage of my generosity. I was so afraid of losing her that I forgot I might lose myself, or you, he said, wiping away tears. I am so sorry, Mom. I reached across the table and took his hand. We all make mistakes, especially when it comes to love. The question is, what you do next. Thomas decided to stay in his old bedroom that night, needing space to think before confronting Jessica again. He called her to let her know where he was, a brief, tense conversation that ended with him saying, I need time, just like you do. We spent a quiet evening together ordering pizza and watching an old movie like we used to when he was younger. It felt like rediscovering something precious I had thought was lost forever. The peace was shattered the next morning when Jessica arrived unannounced with Laura beside her. They walked in without knocking using Jessica's key. I was in the kitchen washing breakfast dishes when they appeared in the doorway. Where is my husband? Jessica demanded, her eyes puffy from crying but her chin lifted in defiance. Before I could answer, Thomas came downstairs, stopping short when he saw the two women. Jessica. Laura. I was going to call later today. There is no need for calls, Laura said, stepping forward and taking charge as usual. This silly misunderstanding has gone on long enough. Jessica has explained everything to me, and I am here to set things right. There is no misunderstanding, Thomas said firmly. Jessica has been lying to me about our finances, maintaining secret accounts, and deliberately creating conflict between me and my mother. Such accusations, Laura scoffed. Jessica was merely trying to protect you from financial stress. As for the conflict with your mother, well, Dee has never made Jessica feel welcome here. I dried my hands on a dish towel, determined to remain calm. This is between Thomas and Jessica. With all due respect, Laura, this is not your conflict to resolve. Laura's perfectly made-up face registered shock at being addressed so directly. I am Jessica's mother. Her well-being is absolutely my concern. And Thomas is my son, I replied. But they are adults in their own marriage. We can support them without interfering. Jessica stepped forward, tears starting again. Thomas, please come home with me. We can work this out without all this drama. I love you. Where is home exactly? Thomas asked quietly. The apartment we can supposedly not afford. This house where we have been living off my mother's generosity. Or the condo your parents bought that you never told me about. Jessica froze her eyes, darting to Laura in panic. What condo? I do not know what you are talking about. Stop lying. Jessica Thomas said tiredly. I know about the trust fund, the separate account, the property your parents bought. I know everything. Laura's expression hardened. You had no right to investigate Jessica's private financial matters. Those arrangements are between our family and our daughter. I am her husband, Thomas countered. There should be no financial secrets between us. Unless you never intended this marriage to be a true partnership. Partnerships are between equals, Laura said dismissively. You have never been Jessica's equal financially or socially. The room went silent. Even Jessica looked shocked at her mother's bluntness. Thomas stood very still, absorbing the insult, then looked directly at Jessica. Is that how you see me too, as beneath you? Jessica's conflicted expression told us everything. She was caught between her love for Thomas and her lifetime of conditioning to value status and wealth above all else. She reached for him hesitantly. Thomas, please. Mom did not mean it that way. I think she did, he replied softly. And I think part of you believes it too. That was when Jessica uttered the words that would change everything. Thomas, if you really love me, you will choose me, over her pointing at me with a trembling finger. The ultimatum hung in the air, a turning point none of us could take back. The kitchen fell silent as Jessica's ultimatum settled over us. Choose her or choose me. A mother and son's lifetime relationship against a 3-year marriage built on deception. In Jessica's mind, it seemed a simple choice. In reality, it revealed everything about her worldview. I decided it was time to set some boundaries once and for all. This is my home, I said calmly but firmly. I have welcomed you both for 18 months, far beyond our original agreement. I have overlooked disrespect, manipulation, and lies out of love for my son. That ends today. Laura stepped toward me, using her height advantage to try to intimidate me. How dare you speak to my daughter this way? Quite easily, I replied, standing my ground. Jessica signed a rental agreement. She has been paying me from a secret account while telling Thomas they could not afford their own place. These are facts, not accusations. What Jessica does with her personal funds is none of your business, Laura snapped. It became my business when she moved into my home under false pretenses. It became my business when she deliberately drove a wedge between me and my son. And it definitely became my business last night when she publicly insulted me at my own dinner table. Thomas moved to stand beside me, a gesture of solidarity that brought tears to my eyes. Mom is right. We have taken advantage of her generosity while lying to her face. It needs to stop. Jessica looked betrayed. You are taking her side after everything we have been through together. This is not about sides, Thomas insisted. This is about honesty. Why did you hide the trust fund from me? Why have we been living here when you could afford our own place at any time? Because my parents would take control of my trust if I used it to support you, Jessica blurted out, then covered her mouth as if she had revealed too much. Laura shot her daughter a warning look. Jessica, this is not the time or place. No, I think it is exactly the time and place, I interjected. Let us get everything out in the open. What do you mean, Jessica? What control? Jessica looked between her mother and Thomas, clearly torn. Finally, the truth spilled out. The trust becomes fully mine at 35 without conditions. But until then, my parents can restrict access if they believe I am making poor life choices. Like using it to support a husband they think is beneath me. So you have been pretending financial hardship, making Thomas work himself to exhaustion, and taking advantage of my home, all to protect your trust fund. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. It is more complicated than that, Jessica insisted. Mom and Dad have expectations about how I should live, who I should marry. When I chose Thomas, they were disappointed, but said they would accept my choice if he could provide for me properly. If he could not, they said it proved they were right about him. Thomas looked stricken. So our entire living situation has been a test. 1. You rigged for me to fail by hiding resources and creating unnecessary financial strain. Not a test, Jessica protested. I was trying to protect us both. If I used my trust fund, my parents would see it as proof you could not support me. If we got our own place on just your salary, we would have to live below the standard they expect. Staying here was the only solution that kept everyone happy. Everyone except Mom, Thomas pointed out. Everyone except me working overtime while you spent money we supposedly did not have. Everyone except our marriage, which has been built on lies from the start. Laura stepped in again, her voice taking on a more conciliatory tone. What Jessica has done may seem deceptive, but she was caught in an impossible situation trying to balance family expectations with her love for you. I had heard enough. Laura, with all due respect, you created this impossible situation by making your daughter choose between financial security and marital honesty. What kind of mother does that to her child? Laura drew herself up indignantly. I have only ever wanted what is best for Jessica. No, I countered. You have wanted what you think is best, which is for Jessica to live the life you envisioned for her, not the one she chose. A good mother supports her child's choices even when they differ from her own dreams. Jessica was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. You do not understand how hard it has been trying to please everyone. I understand more than you think, I said gently. But pleasing everyone is impossible, especially when it requires dishonesty. Thomas took Jessica's hands in his expression serious. Jess, I love you, but I cannot continue in a marriage where we are not equal partners, where your loyalty is divided between me and your parents' expectations. We need complete honesty from this point forward. What are you saying? Jessica whispered, fear evident in her voice. I am saying we need space. Real space, not just a night apart. We need to figure out if this marriage can be saved, and that requires both of us to be completely honest about what we want and need. Laura inserted herself between them. This is absurd. Jessica, gather your things. You are coming home with me until Thomas regains his senses. For the first time, Jessica pulled away from her mother. No, Mom. Thomas is right. We need to face this honestly. She turned to me, surprising me with direct eye contact. I owe you an apology, Dee. I have not treated you or your home with the respect you deserve. Laura looked shocked at this small rebellion. Jessica, you cannot be serious. After everything we have done for you. That is just it, Mom. You have done things for me, not with me. You have tried to control my life through money, just like you controlled yours through Dad. I do not want that kind of marriage for myself and Thomas. The raw honesty in the room was uncomfortable, but necessary. Thomas suggested Jessica and Laura leave to give everyone time to process. We cannot resolve years of dysfunction in one morning, he said wisely. Jessica agreed, but not before asking if she could speak with me alone for a moment. Laura protested, but eventually waited in the car after Jessica insisted. Once we were alone in the living room, Jessica spoke softly. I meant what I said. I am sorry for how I have treated you. Comparing you to my mother was unfair and cruel. Why did you do it? I asked. What did I ever do to deserve such treatment in my own home? Jessica looked down at her hands. I was jealous. Thomas talks about you with such love and respect. He never speaks of my mother that way. I wanted what you two have, but instead of building that kind of relationship myself, I tried to tear yours down. It was petty and wrong. Her admission surprised me. Thank you for your honesty. That cannot have been easy to say. I do love Thomas, she continued. But I need to figure out who I am without my mother's influence. And I need to be honest with him about everything if we have any chance of moving forward. That sounds like a wise first step, I acknowledged. She left soon after joining Laura in the waiting car. Thomas and I watched from the window as they drove away, an uncertain future hanging over all of us. What will you do? I asked him once they were gone. Take some time. Think. Maybe talk to a therapist, he replied. I love Jessica, but I cannot go back to how things were. And I will not let anyone make me choose between my wife and my mother. That is an impossible and unfair choice. I nodded, respecting his mature approach. Whatever happens, I am here for you. Not to make decisions for you, but to support the ones you make for yourself. He hugged me then, a real hug, like he used to give before Jessica came into our lives. I know, Mom. And that is why no one could ever make me choose against you. Real love does not require cutting off other love in your life. It embraces it all. In that moment, I felt a glimmer of hope that whatever happened next, my son had found a strength and clarity that would serve him well, whether his marriage survived or not. As for me, I had finally reclaimed my role as mother rather than doormat, speaking my truth while still supporting my child. It felt like the beginning of a healthier chapter for us all. 1 week turned into 2, then 3. Thomas stayed with me while Jessica remained with her parents. They met for coffee several times, had one session with a marriage counselor, and exchanged numerous texts and calls. I gave Thomas his space, never prying, but always available when he wanted to talk. During this time, Thomas discovered just how much financial deception had occurred in their marriage. Beyond the trust fund and separate account, Jessica had been secretly paying for her parents to take luxury vacations, buying expensive artwork for their home, and even making payments on a vacation property in Maine that Thomas had never heard of. "It is like I was married to a stranger," he confided one evening as we sat on the porch swing. "Someone wearing Jessica's face, but with a completely different set of values and priorities than she presented to me." "People are complicated," I said. "Sometimes they hide parts of themselves because they are ashamed or afraid of rejection. And sometimes outside influences like Laura distort their perception of what matters." After a month of separation and soul-searching, Jessica and Thomas reached a decision. They would move out of my house into their own apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in a nice but not luxurious building that they could afford on Thomas's salary alone. Jessica would continue therapy to work on her relationship with her mother and money. Thomas would see his own therapist to address the trust issues the deception had created. They invited me over for dinner the first night after they moved in. The apartment was small, but tastefully furnished with a mix of new items and a few pieces I recognized from my basement storage. Jessica greeted me warmly, but nervously, showing me around with none of the condescension she had previously displayed toward my home. "We wanted you to be our first guest," she explained, handing me a glass of wine. "To thank you for your patience and to show you we are serious about making changes." Dinner was a simple pasta dish that Jessica had prepared herself, not catered or made by Thomas, as would have been the case before. It was slightly overcooked, but served with genuine pride that made it taste better than any restaurant meal. "I am learning to cook," Jessica admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Thomas's mother was kind enough to share some recipes with me." The Thomas's mother reference, instead of using my name, felt strange, but was clearly an attempt to acknowledge our proper relationship rather than the overfamiliar yet disrespectful dynamic she had previously enforced. "I would be happy to show you some basics," I offered cautiously, "if that would be helpful." Jessica's face lit up with surprising enthusiasm. "Really, that would be amazing. My mother never cooked, we always had staff for that. I never learned the simplest things." Thomas watched our exchange with visible relief. We were not friends. Jessica and I, not yet, and perhaps not ever. But we were establishing a foundation of mutual respect that had been missing before. Over the following weeks, a new pattern emerged. Jessica came to my house every Thursday afternoon for cooking lessons. We started with basics like properly chopping vegetables and cooking rice, then progressed to simple sauces and eventually full meals. During these sessions, guard by guard, she revealed more about her relationship with Laura. "My mother had my entire life planned before I was born," she explained, while learning to knead bread dough. "The right schools, the right friends, the right husband from the right family. When I deviated from that plan by falling in love with Thomas, it was the first time I had ever truly defied her." "That must have been frightening," I acknowledged. "Terrifying," Jessica admitted. "I have spent my whole life seeking her approval. The trust fund was her way of maintaining control even after I married. Every dollar came with criticism and conditions." Understanding Jessica's background helped me see her behavior in a new light. Not to excuse it, but to recognize the deep insecurities that had driven her actions. A lifetime of conditional love had made her desperate for approval, while simultaneously resentful of those who offered love freely, like I did to Thomas. Meanwhile, Laura was not taking the new arrangement well. She called Jessica, constantly alternating between guilt trips and angry demands that she return to proper society. When Jessica began enforcing boundaries, Laura resorted to financial threats, restricting access to the trust fund. "Let her keep it," Jessica said after a particularly difficult call. "I would rather live simply and honestly than wealth through manipulation." It was a breakthrough moment, one that made me see Jessica had more courage than I had previously given her credit for. The most significant test came when Jessica discovered she was pregnant 3 months after moving into the new apartment. Her joy was immediately tempered by fear. "What if I become like my mother?" she confessed to me one afternoon, hands protectively covering her still flat stomach. "What if I try to control my child the way she controlled me?" "The fact that you are asking that question already puts you on a different path," I assured her. "Being aware of the pattern is the first step to breaking it." Jessica asked me to accompany her and Thomas to their first ultrasound appointment, a gesture of inclusion that moved me deeply. As we watched the tiny heartbeat fluttering on the screen, I felt a sense of hopeful continuity. My family was growing, evolving, healing in ways I could not have imagined during those dark days of conflict. Thomas and Jessica invited Laura and Robert for dinner to share the pregnancy news. Laura immediately began making plans, talking about nursery decorators and nannies, which schools the child would attend. Jessica interrupted her mother gently but firmly. "Mom, we appreciate your excitement, but Thomas and I will be making these decisions ourselves. We want your love and support, not your management." Laura looked stunned, then hurt. Robert, usually silent in his wife's presence, surprisingly spoke up. "Laura, listen to what Jessica is saying. This is their child, their life." It was a small moment of support, but significant in a family dynamic where Laura's word had always been final. Jessica told me later that it was the first time she could remember her father openly contradicting her mother. 6 months into Jessica's pregnancy, we had established a new normal. Sunday dinners alternated between my house and their apartment. Jessica had found part-time work at a small interior design firm, using her talent without the pressure of financial necessity. Thomas had been promoted again, this time celebrated properly with acknowledgement from all sides. Laura remained difficult but was making small efforts to change, perhaps realizing that continuing her controlling behavior would mean limited access to her grandchild. She and I maintained a polite distance, civil for the sake of our shared family, but unlikely to ever become friends. As for me, I learned profound lessons through this difficult journey. I learned that loving my son did not mean enabling behavior that hurt him or me. I learned that standing my ground while uncomfortable in the moment ultimately led to healthier relationships for everyone involved. Most importantly, I learned that it is never too late to establish boundaries and speak your truth. One evening, as Thomas and I sat on my porch waiting for Jessica to arrive for dinner, he took my hand and thanked me. For what I asked. For pushing your chair back that night, he said simply, "If you had just taken Jessica's insult like all the others, nothing would have changed. We would still be living in a web of lies and resentment." Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is refuse to accept disrespect, even when it means conflict. His words warmed my heart. At 68, I was still learning how to be a mother, still discovering new ways to love my son by respecting both him and myself. When Jessica arrived glowing with second trimester health, carrying a pie she had baked herself, I welcomed her with genuine warmth. Our relationship would always be complicated, shaped by the difficult path we had traveled together, but there was authentic care there now, and mutual respect that had been earned rather than demanded. Looking at the two of them, heads bent together as they discussed baby names and nursery colors, I felt profound gratitude for that dinner 6 months ago, when Jessica had said, "You are not even half the woman my mother is," and I had finally found the courage to push my chair back and respond. True strength is not found in domination or control, as Laura believed, but in the courage to speak difficult truths and the wisdom to know when to stand firm. Sometimes pushing your chair back from the table is the first step toward bringing the family together in a healthier way. So what about you? Have you ever had to stand your ground with family members who crossed boundaries? Did it lead to conflict or resolution? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength through difficult family situations. Remember, setting boundaries is not selfish. It is an act of love for yourself and others. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.